The Institute of Internal Auditors presents All Things Internal Audit Tech. In this episode, Charles King talks with Imraan Mulla about the transformative potential of AI in internal auditing. They discuss AI's evolution from basic automation to advanced applications, the challenges of adoption, and the future of internal auditing. The conversation also covers continuous monitoring, risk assessment, and the role of human judgment in an AI-driven world.
Imraan, I am so excited to have this conversation with you. I feel like you always bring so many great ideas and sort of forward thinking, and what you do at Cap One is really, really impressive.
It's great to be here and talking to you. You always bring out the best conversation. So excited for this one.
Excellent. All right. Well, when we were back at GAM, we had a session on AI with Anton Dam from Audit Board. And, one of the things that was really eye-opening for me in that session is every time I do a session on AI, I ask the audience, how many of you are using AI at work? And historically, over the past year, let's say, it's been roughly half, maybe a slight majority, 60% of people raise their hands. When we were having that session, it was 3/4, at least, maybe more.
I do think like a lot of more audit shops have gone ahead and got their auditors Gen AI through sort of the white label and just out of the box Gen AI. So I think definitely the conversation has changed just from a few months ago when we did this. It was maybe 20%, 30% to 60, 70%.
Yeah.
We're seeing more people with Gen AI in their day to day. What they do with it is another question.
Right. Well, I think that's exactly the right question to ask. How is it being used? Because when we asked the question about how many of you are using this for assurance related activities, the number was a lot smaller. And that's one of the things that we see in our work with clients as well, is that people buy AI tools, but really widespread adoption, the kind of adoption that's leading to really transformational outcomes, we're not seeing that yet. And I know you were an early adopter, and definitely I consider you a leader in the space. How are you thinking about driving adoption in your team and making sure that you're getting some of the ROI from these AI investments?
I think like the sort of common pitfall in adopting AI is going to auditors and asking them how are you going to use it, right? It's similar to the conversations that we've had on analytics, right? You have a auditor asking an analytical person like, how do you want to use analytics? It often comes down to people want to. I always say AI is the new outsourcing, right? You've been in the era where automation was the new outsourcing. So now AI is the new outsourcing. A lot of auditors want to outsource to AI what they find tedious, hard to do. But that is not where true transformation is. I think where true transformation is reimagining audit and thinking if AI can do all the things that auditors were doing manually, what should an audit shop do? What is highest value? What are the biggest insights we can bring to our execs, boards, stakeholders, and how do we reimagine how we work? So in terms of how do I sort of encourage teams to think about it is start with the end and work backwards. Don't start with, okay, I have Gen AI, what could I use it for? And don't throw everything at Gen AI. And what ends up happening, I think I see it, you probably see it, is most people use it to wordsmith reports, issues, and things that they spend a lot of time doing. True, there is some value in that, but it does not fundamentally change the value of the audit function.
Yeah, I sometimes think of it as the paradox of quick wins. You can go say, "Oh, we did all these things and they, had some incremental value." But quick wins rarely transform the function and get these kind of radical improvements in efficiency and effectiveness that we're looking for from these big technology investments.
100%. I think it's quick, easy, convenient for auditors, but in that you miss the asking the bigger questions of how do we truly transform the value that audit brings to the enterprise.
Yeah. So you and I both love technology. We both think that internal audit is, right in the middle of being disrupted. I'd love to look out, let's look out 10 years and let's talk about what does an internal audit shop look like 10 years from now when all of this agentic AI and all of this is, more fully embedded into what we're doing. How has internal audit changed in your opinion?
How I think of it is in 10 years from now, internal audit functions and everything that how an internal audit function operates will fundamentally change. Let me explain a little bit, give it a bit of color. So everybody talks about agentic AI. So in my view, you will probably not have one autonomous AI doing it all, but instead of that, what you will have is a core AI that knows your enterprise policies, knows your processes, knows your risk. So you think of it as this generalist expert on all things related to your enterprise. And what that will combine with is sort of small language models that are specialists at certain things. So there's a small language model that is a specialist at evaluating third-party contracts. There's another small language model that's an expert at evaluating BCP, business continuity programs. And essentially, audit methodology will include a library of prompts and sort of AI tool calling that when you are in a certain part of either the planning process, risk assessment, certain agents come back and give you sort of, here's the key outliers, here's the key risks, here are the key themes, here are the key trends that we want to go and evaluate. And auditors' job then becomes, instead of going and collecting all these data and doing stakeholder interviews, it becomes about investigating and opining on, based on these data points, where do we think the risks are? Where do we think our controls are in terms of mitigating those risks?
So that's a pretty big change from where we are today. So I wonder, that's going to take some investment. That's going to take some change management. If I came to you and said, you've got an unlimited budget for innovation, right? Dollars don't matter. We just want really innovative, next generation internal audit. Talk to me a little bit about, how do you prioritize those investments? Where do you start? What should other internal audit leaders be focused on in terms of bringing that future to the present?
I think like the mistake most people make is they pick the tool and then they decide what to do with it. So you pick GenAI, then like, what can we throw at GenAI? I think that's the wrong way to think about it. In audit, you should always start with the risk. What are your highest risks? Then you find the tool or technology or AI that is appropriate for that. So in a lot of cases, you might be better off not using GenAI today, right? Because the technology is not mature enough to give you what you need. It might be machine learning or NLP that gives you more predictable, reliable outcomes that can sort of fundamentally transform your process. So in terms of where to start, you want to think about it, will this be bedded into my process? And does this now become the default process by which we do this? We cover this risk. If it is something that sits on the side, that is a nice to have, that you could still do it without and there's nobody would know, I think you've not realized the value.
One of the things that we've been doing at KPMG is really kind of breaking down the internal audit process, start to finish, right? We have a whole process decomposition, and we're going through every one of those tasks, and we're saying, which of these can be technology enabled, right? Not just Gen AI, but really looking at the full stack of, Gen AI is a piece, but there's, I'll say traditional AI, ML kind of solutions, basic analytics that a lot of internal audit teams already have, automation, whether it's RPA or workflow, looking at your audit management tools that you have and thinking about how do you really optimize the use of those and get value out of them. And then going through and saying, well, there are some things that we can 100%, we can automate this, or we can use Gen AI to perform this task. And there's other tasks where we can use some kind of technology to partially automate it, and there may still be a human piece. And then there's pieces like stakeholder engagement that we may not ever want to automate, because those are the parts of our job that we think are really important and where we still need a lot of human interaction. And as we think about moving through that process, we try to layer in a view of, well, what is going to be the biggest return on that investment? And return may be dollars. Return may be a little bit more intangible, like, what is going to create more job satisfaction for our people? What is going to take something away that they maybe aren't as interested in doing, or make the doing of that a more interesting, more rewarding activity? Or what is going to add value to our other stakeholders, right? Not people on our team, but what are other executives going to see as valuable from the internal audit function? in terms of the value we deliver to them, maybe in the form of reports or insights, but also in terms of the interactions with audit stakeholders and reducing the amount of time they need to spend on an audit, reducing the non-value add time they need to spend gathering data for us or answering questions for us, rather than having a really meaningful dialogue. And that's sort of been my approach, is if you really kind of flow chart out an audit and really pinpoint those areas and just move through the life cycle of an audit, I think that can be a really valuable exercise.
I think that is the right approach. The only thing I would add is, as you go through this step, like, I think it's important to go back to what is the true value of performing this process, right? Instead of getting caught in the mechanics of it. I think the mistakes, like, people do hear that, but then they get caught up in the mechanics of, like, step 1, step 2, step 3. Which of these steps can we automate? But I think that can distract the conversation away, right? And it gives you something very quick and easy to latch onto and solve for, but doesn't truly, up the value. So if you're doing risk assessment, what you're trying to opine on is, what is the highest risk? What evidence do I have that we should be more concerned about these risks than we were 6 months ago? And sort of having a data-driven view of risks across the entire life cycle. I think that is where true value of AI is, because ultimately what AI is able to do better is take patterns, identify patterns, take these patterns and extrapolate them and look across the enterprise to identify where else could this be happening. These are not easy questions without the data, without the technology to answer. And that is where the highest value.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. Like the risk that you run into when you take this very mechanistic approach is that you sort of do it back in the RPA days, we used to say, don't pave the cow path, right? And I think the same risk is true if you have a very traditional internal audit approach and you go through step by step. You may actually end up automating things that don't need to be done in the first place in an AI driven or data driven world.
Exactly. I think, like, the thing is, like, if you're automating something that doesn't even need to be done, you can provide a higher value by sort of reimagining your work. I think automation makes it easier to be stuck in the past sometimes. Like, I think we think of automation as the way to the future, but sometimes that's what's keeping you in the past, because you're not rethinking, okay, if I can do something else altogether, why am I still, you know, because now you have said these are the steps and this is the automation you have to use. And now you're stuck in this process and that's all you will ever do.
That's such a great point. Can you think of a process at, as if you thought about Capital One, you've thought about your internal audit process, is there something where you can remember technology fundamentally changing your approach, where you either, to the point where making stop doing something that you used to do or do things in a completely different way because of the technology that your teams have available?
I think, like, in general, looking out across my audit experience, I'll give you a few examples. For continuous monitoring, for example, there was a time where audit, and I know you have a hot take on this, that if you're doing continuous monitoring, you're managing somebody else's process. But ultimately, like, that was the thought process for a while on continuous monitoring, that you do something, you do the same thing every quarter and you opine on the same thing. But ultimately, what ends up happening is even your stakeholders know every quarter these are the same questions they're going to ask me, and it is now no longer, made no changes to your plan scope, and you're just running this process. And ultimately going from there to data driven and letting the data tell you what are the outliers, what are the emerging risks that we've not seen. We don't know how to opine on these or document these, but we are going to go and investigate and do targeted audits where we think there is a risk that we have never seen before and we think that could end up materializing. That's one example. Another is, I think, going back to sort of, a lot of people talk about the audit processes, but thinking about assurance itself, ultimately doing audits is the audit department's job, but I don't think people think enough about assurance itself. So if you think about something like going from a sample of 50, 100 to doing a full population test over billions of transactions, what ends up happening, even if you find something that is outlier of 1% of that population, it helps you investigate the root causes and get to the true deficiencies in your control environment, instead of a check the box. We did look at it. We didn't find anything.
I'd love to double click on the continuous monitoring idea. So one of the things that auditors often ask me when they start getting into the world of continuous monitoring or continuous auditing is when you have, I'll say, anomalies, something that requires follow-up, may or may not result in a finding, they're disconnected from the traditional episodic audit report. So traditional internal audit, I have an audit, I do the audit, I do the report, and I may not touch that area, maybe never again, or maybe not for a few years. And so that report is the state of the union, or at least our point of view. When you have new information coming about a process every month or every quarter, what's your approach to following up on that, but then reporting on what you find? How do you, that doesn't seem like an audit report, but you also need to tell people that you're looking at, whether it's management or the board. How do you think through that? And what's your continuous monitoring, follow up, and reporting look like?
And I think that this is a really good question because this is a challenge all audit shops are going through. And again, how I did it previously, I can't today because methodologies are different across audit shops. But what I found sort of to be the best practice is essentially you have to let the data tell you, right? You cannot go in with a view that this is how we look at continuous monitoring and we document them and that's it. That is boxing yourself in. So it could lead to one of multiple routes, and you have to be open to those and be also cognizant of the fact you need to define some guardrails on which paths can be taken under which circumstances and what is the checks and controls and reviews in place for those to happen. So you could go down the route of I looked at it, it confirms our view of the risk and last audit opinion is still valid. You document it, what has been looked at in a way that you can leverage it if you are doing an related audit or something that it needs to be referenceable. So the evidencing is really important of what was looked at. How did you reach the conclusion? Even if it's not an audit report, it's very important that you always, every time audit gives an opinion, it is grounded in rationale and documentation that backs a third party can read and get to the same conclusion. The other routes are basically doing a targeted audit. You're like, okay, we don't necessarily think we know enough about this to opine. We need to go and investigate more. So you go down the target.
It almost becomes a sort of quasi risk assessment. You identify something, so now we're going to go.
Exactly. And or it might be you've had some conversations, your view of the risk has changed, but you think you understand it enough that you don't need to go and deeper dive. In that case, you would change your risk assessment and change it from, say, a medium to a high, and that would change your audit plan. So it could go one of those routes.
Yeah. So as more and more, I've been seeing internal audit teams refresh their internal audit strategy. Like the global internal audit standards now have prompted this rethinking of how internal audit's going to work. And I'm seeing a lot of continuous auditing on those strategies. And I always think about the interplay between the strategy that we want to do because of the nature of the business, because of the needs of the stakeholders, but that's informed by the technological capabilities, right? New technologies like Gen AI open strategic opportunities that simply weren't there in the past. And so you have this hopefully virtuous cycle of strategy influencing decisions about process and technology, but technology capabilities influencing our strategy. And I'd love to hear you kind of think about how you have approached your internal audit strategy and your innovation strategy at Cap One, given some of the disruptions in technology lately.
And I think I always say like innovation is where what's impactful meets what's possible, right? And in light of what's possible, you essentially go back and reimagine sort of which are the processes. Ultimately, I go, if the way you think about it is also, it has to be rooted in what audit's value is. So you have to look at it and say, where are the areas where we are not able to provide a higher level of assurance because we are limited by what was possible. So you go and explore those, right? Audit departments and auditors are drowning in data these days. Like it's the opposite problem of say 20 years ago where people like, where I don't know how to find data. Right. Now people like, I have just too much data. I have no confidence that I'm opining my opinion factors in everything that I've been given.
And by the way, too much good data, right? Good, high quality, curated, managed data is everywhere. And we sort of have the opposite problem of, you would hear 10 years ago, well, we've got all this data, but it's not really reliable. It's not really good. It takes a lot of prep to work with that data. And now so many investments have been made. We're reaping the benefits of that and we're a little bit overwhelmed.
Yeah. So I think ultimately how I think about it strategy wise is like, what is the risk? How are we going to opine on it? What does the technology allow us to do? And then you come to how do I reframe my entire process? So maybe going back to a little bit about audit cycles, right? So we've traditionally had like this is how you cycle through audits. But now you can move to sort of a more flexible audit plan where you go where the highest risks are. You place reliance on the work you've done unless there is a change in risk. And instead of like doing the same audit and coming up with the same opinion, you can now do flexible auditing and let it be driven by risks in the enterprise. So all of this has been made possible by sort of some of the emerging technologies, but what we are still not getting enough of maybe, and I think I hope in the future years will be, is a lot of the unstructured data can now be analyzed in the same way that structured data could be analyzed, right? So a lot of places where auditor says I don't have good data, they actually meant I don't have tabular data. And now they have governance memos, risk assessments, pages and pages of documents that can be converted into structured data that you can analyze.
Yeah. I think that's such a great point because the ability to not just analyze and synthesize these large unstructured data sets, but the ability to now on the fly create knowledge assistants that will help you deal with, regulations, with frameworks, with internal audit methodologies, the capabilities of things like Copilot and Gemini and these other things that allow you to just reference your own documents really opens up a whole world of how we interact with these large unstructured documents and data sets. I think that's a great point.
And I think like how I also think about it, right? As you go through it, like one of the things I would always say is the accuracy of the model is the clarity of the subject matter expert, right? Is the ability of your subject matter expert, whether that's a regulatory expert or a risk expert, to articulate how do they parse information, how do they get to an opinion, and then that allows you to teach AI or build automation that follows the best in class approach to evaluating risk and opining on.
Right. So I imagine a lot of subject matter experts would hear that and think, oh no, like that's the end of my world. Right. So, talk to me a little bit about the human side of this. How are we, I don't think either of us believe that AI or AI agents are here to take everyone's jobs. In my experience, the list of to-dos in internal audit is way longer than we've ever gotten to. So if we get to a few more, I think that's great. But as an innovator and someone who introduces technology, not just Gen AI, but you've been doing this for years, right? So you introduce new technology. RPA was like, oh no, the automation's coming for our jobs. And then Gen AI came out, it's coming for our jobs. But how do you think through that? And how do you talk to teams or other leaders about how this technology impacts or influences their staffing and resourcing strategies?
And I think for the foreseeable future, AI or any of these technologies are going to be human in the middle for sure, right? There is no autonomous AI, at least for the foreseeable future. I do want to go back to how should people think about it, right? I think you're right in that people think of it in a very sort of, will this take my job away sometimes? And or in a very narrow, how can this make my life easier? And I think those are both narrow questions, right? It is in fact an exciting time to be in audit because you can do all like the most interesting work of when you have all this technology available to give you the patterns, the risks, the themes and trends to investigate. And basically it allows you to do more interesting work, but also do the highest value work, which is work that requires expertise, human judgment, and navigating gray space that you cannot simply train a model to do, or you cannot have just technology do it for you. And I think that's the way to think about it.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, the thing that drew me to audit at the beginning of my career was that I feel like I'm a really inherently curious person. I always want to ask questions. And the ability to go into the business and ask questions about virtually any business process, any function, that was really, really appealing to me. I never got into internal audit because I wanted to like test three-way match controls, right? Or look at change management controls or anything like that. So I think if you get down to the root of why do we love what we do? Why is this a job that I want to have? Those are not the kinds of things that, at least in my experience, that we are targeting technologies at, right? We're targeting technology at how do I do, user access testing more effectively, or how do I make sure that our financial controls are working the way they're supposed to work at scale, maybe 100% population or whatever it is. It's not about eliminating curiosity; it's about feeding curiosity.
And I think that's the thing that people are maybe missing in this is all this technology gives audit a better seat at the table. And audit does have a unique seat at the table, which is what I personally found most exciting coming into audit in the second half of my career. Because in audit is a unique place because you're looking across businesses, across processes, and the ability to connect the dots and sort of bring these insights that people like I would not have known just being in my own silo, in my own world, that these problems are more universal than mine. And there are others in the enterprise or the wider industry who found solution to these. So that ability to find sort of deep rooted problems, common thematic problems that and help people think through the solutions, I think that is where internal audit can really bring a lot of value to all enterprises. And this technology transformation enables audit to have a better seat at the table, have more sort of higher impact conversation, then sort of narrow why do 50 people have access to this application when they shouldn't, which is really sort of not the kind of thing you want to talk to execs about.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Well, I think it comes back to that fear is rooted in not having a culture of innovation where you expect things to change and you expect to disrupt yourself. And as an innovation leader, and you've got a pretty big team and an extended team of co-source providers and vendors and others, building that culture of innovation is so core to innovating, to keeping people engaged, to dealing with some of those concerns about is it coming from my job. Let's talk a little bit about things that leaders can do to drive the spirit of innovation in their team so that they really embrace this new technology rather than being concerned about it or confused by it.
So I think as leaders, there's you need to think of innovation in multiple ways, right? A lot of leaders just think of innovation in sort of the technology, like just tell me what is a technology, show me what it can do, and that's how they sort of think of innovation. But that leaves a lot on the table. How I think about it is like you're thinking about like what has like cutting edge innovation essentially for me is what's only just become possible meets impactful, right? So you need to look at, okay, what could I not have done? There's that kind of top down transformative innovation. But what you also need to embed into your day to day is identifying innovation where while you're doing it, you're like, we struggle with coming up with an opinion on this. We struggle to risk assess this. And you're collecting all these ideas. So that's what I've done at every place I've been is introduce sort of a process where people doing the job while they're doing the job they can submit in 2 minutes an idea, and you look across these. The power of that has been when you look across these ideas also you see a pattern, and that tells you a lot about where your processes, where your value is weaker, where your personnel are struggling to perform, execute what you state as a policy or as a goal, and connecting that like this is where we want to go, this is where our people are struggling, then allows you to find technology that solves for those problems that truly transform the day to day.
Yeah, I think that's so great. And I think you're in a really fortunate position of working for a company where innovation is core to your brand. And so it's sort of in the soup at Cap One, right? And I think regardless of whether that's the world you're living in, or if you're in an organization that's maybe not quite as forward leaning when it comes to innovation in general and tech specifically, The advice I always give to internal audit teams is you should keep pace with the business. It's pretty rare in my experience that internal auditor is the first adopter of any new technology. It happens sometimes, but I think it's the exception rather than the rule. And what I think is far more common is that internal audit lags the business by several years in terms of their adoption of technology. Somebody in operations will get some great new tool, and then internal audit gets around to it later. I wonder, do you agree with that idea of keeping pace? And how should I think about, or how should audit leaders think about really capitalizing on the investments that have been made at an enterprise level without putting technology first, but understanding that you've got all these tools on the workbench, you've got to decide which ones you want to pick up and when you want to pick them up.
So I have a sort of a nuanced view on one of those things, but I will get to sort of your first point of keeping pace. I think as more and more controls get automated, more and more technology gets introduced in risk, sort of managing risk and how operations work, you do need to keep pace because you cannot challenge a model with a sample testing, or if there is a model out there, you need to be able to build a challenger model that challenges sort of the efficacy of the models used. Similar to that, I think there is a need for audit to be able to process the same level of information, right, and make their own parallel independent opinion of those decisions in the same way that first and second line functions are doing it. But where I sort of have a now more nuanced view, having been in this industry for a long time, I did have the same view that coming into audit, I was like, is audit really the place that will be for me? Because I want to be at the frontier of innovation. What I've come to realize over sort of my career is audit can be actually the beacon for innovation for the entire bank. Because one, audit has several advantages in that, right? One, while innovation comes in ops and revenue generating functions, I have in my career seen innovation in risk management functions is lagging. And that's where I do think, in fact, audit might be ahead in some cases of risk management functions, which then helps audit inform and educate business on how they can better manage, assess, and mitigate their risk. The second thing is audit has a unique point of view in that you're able to look across the enterprise. So going to the board, you can say these different functions, they're struggling with the same root cause. So these are the things we need to prioritize as an enterprise. So again, you do need to keep pace, but you should also, I think audit departments should think of like, where is it that audit can provide that unique value to the enterprise, be a beacon for innovation and risk management, because a lot of businesses are essentially risk management is a core part of the business.
Yeah, I mean, certainly in financial services, it's absolutely front and center. Yeah. I love internal audit as a beacon for innovation. We should get some bumper stickers printed up for the IAA. That's fantastic. I think in early 2025, we can't have a conversation without looking into agents. It is the topic right now. Everyone is talking about agents. Maybe just to start off, like, give me your definition of agents, and then let's talk a little bit about some of the places that you're either using or planning to use agents in the internal audit world.
So I think a lot of talk about agentic AI. I think autonomous AI. I do personally think some of it is overblown. Artificial general intelligence. Some of it is overblown. In that, like there will be a niche of the chat GPTs, the Anthropics of the world, who have the resources, energy, billions of dollars to burn on creating artificial general intelligence. Where I focus as a sort of leader in innovation, since I don't work for Sam Altman, is sort of application, right? Where can we apply these technologies and get real business value? I think, again, coming to my sort of view on this and where I see this going, I think for the foreseeable future, it will be human in the middle. There will be no, self-driving audit shop, so to speak. And how I think about it is like how leaders should think about it is, how does this transform auditing? What are the things that are core principles? Do you want, and if you're thinking about building and investing in this kind of a thing, you want think of it as you develop a expert in your audit department. Your expert would know the core principles of auditing, right? Know how to take a risk-based approach, fundamental sort of principles that never change. So those are things that your training your model, right? You're investing money, teach them these things, and these things are fundamental, they will never change. Then there are aspects which are like general. I don't need to teach this person specifically. This is just how things are done. Communication, basic general ideas. So those are things that you can take out of the box from a lot of the, open source models. Then there are things where you say, okay, I need areas where I want to teach somebody how to look at this specific process in our enterprise and opine in this according to these specific methodology that we've developed. So in those cases, you get sort of enter the space of RAG and, having sort of using a full like externally developed general model, but building small specialized expertise and use your own data instead of just using general out of the box information. So again, I try to keep it non-technical, but essentially there is difference between how much resources you need to spend. You don't want to be training your models on things that constantly change, and you're not really looking for the model to know and remember all the time. And there are things that are basically, I need it just to do this audit step. And then you can use them as in the context window, and you basically start doing them out of the box instead of trying to over engineer it.
I love that. So one last question before we wrap it up here. You didn't start off as an internal auditor, and now you've been in internal audit for several years. So what is the most controversial point of view you have about internal audit coming in from an outside perspective?
So my most controversial view has been, and I think people do find it interesting also, is that audit, if you think about audit as a profession, it's sort of is the fundamental pillar of capitalism. So audit has been done for like over hundreds of years, but more or less in the same way. There's been more data, there's been more technology, but it's more or less in the same way. My view is we are at a point in the audit, sort of where we are in audit, that how audits are done, what an auditor's job is we are at the precipice of it can be fundamentally transformed. And to do that, we need to reimagine how audits have always been done. And I think that is sort of something that leaders need to start thinking about more deeply, right? We've done audit cycles, we've done cycle audits, we've done, risk assessment memos, we've done continuous monitoring dashboards, but all of that doesn't exist in a world where you're able to now process information real time, provide, connect the dots across the enterprise, have more, bigger, deeper conversation instead of narrow, specific views that maybe are lower value. So
this has been a great conversation. Imraan Mulla, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Charles. Pleasure.
Small internal audit teams boost your efficiency at the 2025 Audit Sphere. This one-day virtual conference on June 17th offers expert strategies and practical tools just for you. Register now at theiaa.org. If you like this podcast, please subscribe and rate us. You can subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. You can also catch other episodes on YouTube or at theiaa.org. That's THEIIA.org.